There has been a huge update in Logan Paul's defamation case against CoffeeZilla, where we have found out that Logan Paul is being investigated by the FBI, and CoffeeZilla is the whistleblower for the entire investigation. Now, I've made a few videos talking about this situation in court case, and if you guys are familiar with that and just want the new information, I'm going to break this video up into chapters. Just click on the next one below. Now, if you haven't been keeping up, I'll hash this out in like 2 minutes. If you want more detail, check out my previous videos on this. That'll be links in the little corner here. But essentially, Logan Paul started a defamation case against CoffeeZilla, and that had to do with effectively the entire series of videos that CoffeeZilla had put out talking about CryptoZoo and calling it a scam. Now, that might be sounding more familiar, but it gets more interesting. And that's because recently, CoffeeZilla had put in a motion in regard to his defamation case, and that has to do with the fact that there is currently a class action lawsuit against Logan Paul and the CryptoZoo team, and that's coming from the investors who had put money into CryptoZoo. So there's this entirely separate case going on with the investors going after Logan Paul and the CryptoZoo team, and then you have this defamation case, and what CoffeeZilla wanted to do was group them together. Essentially, he put forward a motion saying, hey, there's a lot of similarities between these cases. It would speed this whole thing up, waste a lot less of people's time if we just join these two cases together and deal with them both at the same time. Except in addition to filing this motion, he also included a ton of evidence that made Logan look really bad. Some like actual cartoon villain stuff like, I want people who wrong me to suffer while I continue getting wins on their grave. Crazy stuff like that, which in its own right, for a lot of people seemed like enough that it would tank his case regardless, but there was also more. In addition to this, they also provided other exhibits which had been filed under seal, meaning they were sealed away from the public, and only the judge and of course the two teams in this case were the only people allowed to see this information. And then we saw Logan Paul and his team freak out about whatever evidence was hiding behind this seal, and they were trying to get all of this evidence thrown out, saying this was almost certainly filed for the sole and improper purpose of providing defendants with an excuse to advocate for their public disclosure in order to harm and embarrass plaintiff. And they also said for some reason it has no relevance at all to defendant's legal argument. And I said for some reason because that leads us into today, where we have found out what is behind those sealed documents as they have been made public. Huge shout out to Legal Bites here on YouTube. I have literally just been covering the information that they have been bringing forth because I don't know how to access the public records, but she has just broken the story 5 hours ago in regard to what was behind these seals. And we have found out through essentially context clues that have been left in footnotes of these legal documents, specifically with this one here, that the confidential evidence and information that was presented had to do with FBI and SEC investigations into Logan Paul and the CryptoZoo team for the CryptoZoo scam. And here's this footnote put on by CoffeeZilla's team saying that since the filing of his response, Paul has withdrawn his third motion to preserve confidentiality and agreed to de-designate the grand jury subpoena, the amended search warrant, and the SEC subpoena. So yeah, this information that has nothing to do whatsoever with the defamation case where CoffeeZilla is saying that Logan Paul is a scammer because of CryptoZoo, yeah, that information has to do with actual federal investigations into Logan Paul and CryptoZoo to find out if there was fraud. So I feel like they might have been stretching the truth a little, but now let's actually get into the meat and potatoes of this. The first thing I want to show you guys is Legal Bytes' opinion on why they ended up like removing the seal from this information.
So we really can't tell from the filings specifically why this was withdrawn. Was this because Paul's lawyers looked at all of the arguments in the case law and everything else and realized, oh crap, this is about to lose hard and very publicly, and that this would all result in a massive Streisand effect? It's hard to tell from this vantage point, but I will say, having read the arguments on both sides, it did look to me like CoffeeZilla was likely to win that argument. And that's where we find out what evidence Logan Paul is so afraid of. Specifically, we start seeing an open reference to some criminal investigations of Logan Paul specifically, and we see that CoffeeZilla was in fact the whistleblower.
Now, personally, this is one of my favorite discoveries that have been made along this process of the case. I don't know about you guys, but I don't see CoffeeZilla pretty much ever really going in depth talking about what he's doing behind the scenes in terms of relaying information that he's gathered over to like the FBI or the SEC. I know he's mentioned it here and there in regard to like the Sam Bankman-Fried stuff or other examples like that, but he really doesn't go into vast detail talking about that specifically. For the most part, he just keeps the focus on the information that he's presenting to the public. What I see with that is him being as good faith as possible, because the latter option is that he is lying about this information and presenting it to the government and lying to the FBI, SEC about an investigation into a potential, case of fraud. I feel like that's a pretty damn big deal. But it turns out Logan Paul's team doesn't agree. As a matter of fact, they think CoffeeZilla is trying to lie to the government and is trying to be a bit schemy.
Let's start with how Logan Paul revealed that CoffeeZilla was a whistleblower who drew in the attention of the federal government to investigate the CryptoZoo team. This, Paul says, was by all appearances a deliberate attempt to advance a false narrative to the federal government. Okay, right off the bat, deliberate false accusations to the government come with very serious penalties, so that is a very heavy accusation made by Paul here. But anyway, he continues. The reason that Findeisen misled the government so brazenly, of course, was that his goal was to prompt the government to investigate and build cases against plaintiffs specifically, whom he had never even spoken to about the project, in order to further harm plaintiff and, he hoped, ultimately claim credit and raise his own profile in the event the investigations resulted in criminal charges or civil penalties against him. And basically what he's getting at is Paul claims that CoffeeZilla didn't give the government any information about any other bad actors on the CryptoZoo team, like Eddie Ibanez and Jake Greenbaum. And he says that because of that, CoffeeZilla was sending the government down this rabbit hole to focus specifically on Logan Paul and to ignore everyone else on the CryptoZoo team.
That is quite a heavy accusation to lay out, that CoffeeZilla was lying and providing a false narrative just to kind of, get a few more clicks, get a bit more clout about this whole thing. That is a pretty intense accusation to levy someone's way. And you would think in tandem with such an accusation, they would provide evidence of that. They don't. Legal Bites herself takes a moment to talk to the audience and be like, hey, I was worried that my bias in this situation was having an effect on how I was able to digest and understand the argument coming from Logan's team. And the only reason she was worried about that was because at face value, she believed that the argument that was just laid out by Logan's team was stupid, was so bad that it made her second guess herself. It couldn't be that bad. That actually had to be intelligent in some type of way that maybe I'm not seeing. She doesn't think so anymore.
And so this is an issue that is always very important for me to keep parsed out so that I can do my job well. And the thing is, it seems like it's always the worst arguments that somehow cause the biggest worry. Am I the idiot here? Do I have a bias? Yeah, there's probably a good chance of that. Am I aware of that possibility? Absolutely. But can I set that bias aside? Personally, I think that my recent video where I talked about Logan Paul's privacy takedowns shows that I can. But anyway, all of that is to say, I think I've landed in the place that this argument by Logan Paul, where he says that CoffeeZilla misled the government and essentially did it for clicks and to claim credit in the event the investigations resulted in criminal charges, is just a really bad argument. Setting aside the fact that CoffeeZilla showed in response that he did, in fact, provide a bunch of information to the FBI about the entire CryptoZoo team, and that this included information about Jake Greenbaum and Eddie Ibanez, even if he didn't send that information to those guys, why would the government not look into the activities of the entire team if they suspected that even just one member of the team had maybe defrauded investors?
How cool is that? In response to these claims, they come backing it with receipts showing, oh no, it's not just that. When I reached out and provided this information, I had information in regard to the entire CryptoZoo team. And they even mentioned right behind that, contrary to the false narrative in Paul's response, CoffeeZilla specifically includes information about Jake Greenbaum, which was someone else a part of the team. But she also goes on to make this point that it just doesn't make sense fundamentally, because at its foundation, this argument is hinging on the fact that CoffeeZilla would maliciously be lying about this information or creating this false narrative where he would then bring in, the top dogs, the people that investigate this for a living, bringing in these people, convincing them to do an investigation. And they're saying that he's doing that for clicks and attention and all this stuff, which doesn't make sense, because if there was nothing, if they investigated the CryptoZoo team and they found nothing, that would destroy CoffeeZilla. CoffeeZilla's claim to fame is the fact that he's able to investigate these things. He's an incredible investigative journalist, and he finds this stuff and brings it to light. He's not famous because he lies about it. As a matter of fact, if he went through all of that trouble only for it to come out that it was all a lie, that he was creating this narrative, his career would be over. Also, almost forgot to mention this, you haven't subscribed yet. We're like balls deep into this video and you haven't subbed. What are you doing? Come on. In all seriousness, if you're enjoying the video, please be sure to leave this a thumbs up. It really helps out in the algorithm. And if you're already subscribed, thank you so much. You guys are the reason I get to do this, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the video. And Legal Bites also shows off this point, but this isn't the first time that CoffeeZilla has done this. This isn't the first time that he's been a whistleblower like in this situation. As a matter of fact, Logan isn't even special in his own right in regard to the stuff that they've already done and the people that he's already exposed on the channel.
Specifically, it's common knowledge that he had a strong hand in blowing open the lid about the FTX fraud, and that's a big reason why Sam Bankman-Fried was convicted of a number of federal offenses. And as CoffeeZilla said in a footnote in his response that made me chuckle, to be honest, Logan Paul isn't special to CoffeeZilla. In fact, he says, CoffeeZilla has routinely provided whistleblower reports to the FBI and SEC in the hopes of stopping cryptocurrency scams. While not publicized, CoffeeZilla's reports have led to multiple arrests and guilty pleas. And then he attaches some exhibits showing some of his prior correspondence with someone at the SEC who told him that his reports in some other unrelated matter that he had sent them were found to be very helpful and well done, and that his report to them on the CryptoZoo matter appears to be from the same mold.
So not only does he prove that, oh, I've done this before, Sam Bankman-Fried, but as a matter of fact, someone that I worked with, let me show you a message from them mentioning how useful the information I provided in the past is, and the fact that the information that I provided in regard to the investigations for Logan Paul are just as useful. Specifically, this tail end sentence here, personally, I have found your reports in the other matter very helpful and well done, and this appears to be from the same mold. So I just wanted to say we appreciate it. Happy to chat anytime. I don't know about you, but that's getting pretty credible for CoffeeZilla. I don't know how much further you can get past a government official working in the SEC saying, hey, the investigations and information you provided to us are killer. And it looks like this Logan Paul stuff, same kind of useful, same kind of great, good work. Now we kind of touched on it earlier, but why were they trying to get this stuff removed? Other than it, of course, being very damaging to the case for them. Well, they did attempt a defense and explanation for why this information was irrelevant. Specifically, the FBI and SEC investigations into Logan Paul and the CryptoZoo team, which were a direct result of CoffeeZilla's whistleblowing.
Logan Paul doesn't really talk about this in any of his filings, other than to say that the SEC closed out its investigation, which he argues means they found no wrongdoing. And he says that all other federal investigation is basically dormant and has gone nowhere, which he says means basically the same thing, no wrongdoing. But CoffeeZilla happily goes into detail about what happened with these investigations and obviously has a different take on it. After that, on March 14th, 2025, CoffeeZilla says that with the change in presidential administration, there's also a change in policy at the SEC. Specifically, the SEC decides to scale back its crypto enforcement action and issues closing letters to Logan Paul and many others. And here he cites to an article talking about this policy change, basically saying, yeah, there are other reasons why the SEC isn't doubling up on the FBI's investigation of you, Logan. However, CoffeeZilla says the FBI investigation remains, and he says they continue to express interest in Paul as recently as early 2025. And he says, as far as he knows, this investigation is ongoing.
CoffeeZilla does an excellent job of outlining why things have seemingly slowed down. And we can see the attempt by Logan Paul and his team to be like, hey, this stuff really doesn't matter. You know, we got closed out on this one. It's no biggie. Also, you know, we haven't heard anything, so it's got to be closed, right? It is tremendously helpful to understand the actual context that the SEC isn't going to double down on the investigation that's already also being conducted by the FBI because they got pulled back. You know, there's a change in the Oval Office. That doesn't mean that they came to a conclusion. It just means they're not like digging deep into it anymore. But from CoffeeZilla's side of things, he's still hearing information in regard to the FBI investigation. So as far as he's concerned, it's still ongoing. With that being said, I'm very curious to hear what your guys' thoughts are on this, but also which way do you think this is gonna go? Logan Paul taking the dub on this or CoffeeZilla? I've got my own personal thoughts. I think there's clearly a fan favorite here, but even just off of the evidence provided, it's looking really bad for Logan. But that does bring us to the end of this video. If you enjoyed it, please be sure to leave a thumbs up, consider subscribing, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Adios. See ya. Peace. Bye.